Playwright Anton Chekhov famously said, "Never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off." In other words, every detail must be relevant, and every setup should have a payoff. Thus, the narrative principle of Chekhov's gun was born. But it isn't always a gun. Chekhov's Whatever is a podcast where myself and guests watch a movie and try to predict what role Chekhov's gun will play. Welcome to Chekhov's Whatever. Hello and welcome to Chekhov's Whatever, the podcast that makes a game of movies and storytelling. I'm your host, Meg Mazeski. Here with me today to talk about the 2026 dark comedy horror thriller Send Help is Kat Rosenfield. Welcome to the podcast, Kat.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Kat is an author, podcaster, freelance columnist, and culture writer. Kat's new novel, How to Survive in the Woods, hit bookshelves on March 10th, and I highly recommend that everyone run out and buy it today, as soon as you're done listening to this podcast. How to Survive in the Woods has been described as Wild meets the Wife Between Us in this page-turning thriller set in Maine's 100-mile wilderness, the treacherous final stretch of the storied Appalachian Trail, an addictive tale of passion, betrayal, control, and what it means to survive. So I'm a huge fan of Kat's novels and her podcast, Feminine Chaos, and I'm just so pleased to have you on the show. Kat, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and your new novel?
Sure. So, as you said, I am sort of all over the place in the culture space. I do my podcast, Feminine Chaos, with Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. I am a culture writer at the Free Press. I moonlight sometimes at Unheard. And I also am the author of 6 novels, and How to Survive in the Woods is the latest. Your summary was very good. I've been like one-shotting it. My elevator pitch is Basic Instinct with bears. So if that sounds fun to you...
So without spoiling How to Survive in the Woods, would you say that there are any Chekhov's guns in your novel? I think that there are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But I could not tell you what they are because it would be a spoiler.
It would be a huge spoiler, yes.
Yes. There is at least, I can think of one for sure.
Me too. So yes, listeners, you should read the book for many reasons, but also to discover for yourself what the Chekhov's guns are. So yes, we are here today to talk about Send Help. Send Help is a 2026 darkly comedic horror thriller. It's described as such. When an employee and her insufferable boss become stranded on a deserted island, they must overcome past grievances and work together to make it out alive. This movie stars Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien, and it was directed by Sam Raimi. Currently on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 93% critic score and an 87% audience score. So, Kat, before we recorded, you said you were dying to see this movie. What were your expectations for this movie, or why did you want to see it?
I'm just a big fan of Sam Raimi.
Yes.
I love his stuff. And I had certain expectations stylistically going in. I knew that I was going to see some gross stuff, and I was pretty excited for it. Apart from that, I went in kind of cold. I intentionally did not learn too much about it because I do find, in general, I've started doing this with movies going in cold because I find that previews tend to give away too much. Mm-hmm. But for a Sam Raimi movie especially, I just feel like, what is the point? What is the point of investigating? Like, there's a promise being implicitly made to you. You know kind of what you're getting, and you can only diminish your experience by investigating further. You should just dive in.
I agree. When you see Sam Raimi on the poster, it's on the label, so to speak. And I'm glad to hear that you had, what I would say are the appropriate expectations, because if someone goes into a Sam Raimi film not knowing what to expect, I can imagine it being quite off-putting.
This is going to be just like Room with a View, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I was also particularly excited to see this particular Sam Raimi movie because it's his first in a long while that hasn't been an IP franchise. So I'm always excited to see, original work, because I think the last work of his was Doctor Strange, I believe. So it was good to see something from, his soul a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is really very much in keeping with, I would say, like the kind of ethos and the vibe of early Sam Raimi. I felt like I was experiencing little, echoes of Evil Dead in
Absolutely.
there. Good times. I also am a big fan. I do love like a movie that has a cast of 2, basically, which this is. I mean, my own stories tend to have small casts. How to Survive in the Woods has a cast of three,
Hmm.
and so yeah, this was a lot of fun in that way, and especially because it's two actors who I wouldn't have necessarily put together, Dylan O'Brien and Rachel McAdams, but boy, they really work well together. He plays an asshole so well.
Yes.
And I was very happy to see, is one of the few actresses in like my age range cohort who does not appear to be freezing her face so that she can't make faces.
Yes.
She makes faces in this, and it's great.
She's still quite expressive. And yes, when you have such a small cast, you become even more reliant on the chemistry between your two leads and just really relying on their performances. And I'm a huge fan of Rachel McAdams. I'm just so pleased to see her whenever she appears on screen. I would describe her as criminally underutilized or underappreciated, but I hear that more and more, so maybe that's not actually true. Maybe people do actually appreciate her now. And yes, I agree that they were great facing off against each other. Like, no one would blink if these two were cast opposite each other in a rom-com as like actual romantic leads together. So I think they have this sort of chemistry that worked surprisingly well.
Yeah.
I'm only really familiar with Dylan O'Brien through seeing him in the early Tumblr years when Teen Wolf was huge on Tumblr for some reason.
He was in The Maze Runner, and he also was in, he did quite a good job actually in, I can't remember what it was called, the Saturday Night Live kind of dramatized first night movie of it. He was in that playing, I think, Dan Aykroyd, and he was terrific. But my favorite bit of Dylan O'Brien lore is that I have actually met him.
Oh,
I was at a party at San Diego Comic-Con in 2019. I had just co-written a book with Stan Lee,
yes.
and because I was there as like a creative, I ended up being invited to a certain number of parties, and I met Dylan O'Brien at this bar. And although he is, I want to say, maybe 10 to 15 years my junior, he did flirt with me, and it pretty much made my night.
I believe it. Oh my gosh, I was already super jealous of your success, and I've only attended Comic-Con as an attendee many a year, but living the dream. All right, before we get into Send Help, here's a quick overview of how Chekhov's Whatever works. This is a podcast where myself and the guest watch and review a movie that's new to us. We also play a game where we try to guess what Chekhov's gun will be and how it will play out later in the movie. Chekhov's gun is a plot element that must have a setup and a payoff. That setup usually happens in Act 1, and the payoff typically comes later in Act 3. A Chekhov's gun is also typically a concrete item, action, or person rather than something symbolic or thematic. And finally, a Chekhov's gun should move the plot forward. So for this episode, we're running a little tight on recording time, so the game and the scoring system are going to be a bit more loosey-goosey than usual. But as they say on Whose Line Is It Anyway, everything's made up and the points don't matter. All right, let's get into Send Help. We begin the movie where we meet our main character, Linda Little, played by Rachel McAdams. She's an intelligent and hardworking corporate strategist who's looking forward to a long-awaited promotion. But for all her smarts, she falls short on charisma. She's frumpy, awkward, and unpopular among her colleagues. And I have to say frumpy in scare quotes because one can only make Rachel McAdams so frumpy.
They did their best.
They
God,
did.
God bless them. But once she's out in the wild and not being like actively frumped by the wardrobe people, she's just absolutely stunning.
Once she ditches that oversized cardigan. All Linda seems to have going for her is her cockatiel sweetie and her love of Survivor. So we get a little glimpse into her apartment, and if you were to go into this movie completely cold, I would say there's potential Chekhov's guns here. We see that she has survival books, that she's a big fan of Survivor, the show itself. However, since I had seen one trailer, I knew the premise. They were going to get stranded on a deserted island. So I'm like, well, at best, this is like foreshadowing that Linda has the know-how to survive.
It's funny. I really struggled as I was watching this. I was like, is that a Chekhov's gun or is it just character development? So I flagged a bunch of things. I was like, maybe it's one, maybe it's the other. And we'll just have to, hash it out, I guess, decide, do we get points or not?
I feel like that's the whole purpose of the podcast, is just getting closer and closer to an absolute definition of Chekhov's gun. But yeah, it's often, conflated with foreshadowing and clues if it's a mystery. So yeah, hard to say. So when Bradley Preston, played by Dylan O'Brien, assumes his father's position as CEO and meets Linda, he's instantly disgusted by her and by the fleck of tuna fish sandwich on her mouth. So what's the opposite of a meet cute? Do we have a phrase for that?
Oh, yeah. Instant revulsion, I guess, is probably the closest thing. I don't know if is it too early to mention a couple of Chekhov's guns that I identified in the opening, like when you first meet her, basically in this first scene where you have Linda. Is it too soon to talk about it?
No, I also have one as well.
Okay, yeah. So I clocked several things. One was her bag with her name on it. I thought that maybe it was going to turn out that she carries this with her everywhere, and it has survival gear in it. Chekhov's monogrammed bag. I also noticed all the inspirational posters in her cubicle, and I was like, are these Chekhov's inspirational posters? Is she going to quote one of these to somebody down the line in an ironic, even maybe snarky context?
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing, and this is it's funny, this scene, it's so hard to watch. She does such a good job of
Yes.
being this incredibly cringeworthy character, to the point where my husband got up. He was like, I can't stand this. I just have to wait for them to crash on the island before I can watch this. When she's sort of trying to insert herself into a conversation with her colleagues who are planning to go to karaoke later. And she says, my go-to karaoke song is One Way or Another. And I was like, that's Chekhov's One Way or Another. Yes. I anticipated that maybe it would play as she was pursuing the bad boss in some kind of chase scene or confrontation later in the movie.
When you have the lyrics, gonna getcha, you know that that's coming back somehow later, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I also had a Chekhov's gun in this scene. I had Chekhov's little mules. These are her shoes, and she says that they're very trusty. Knowing that they're going to be stranded on an island, I think she will make use of these in a tool in some way, also perhaps using the shoelaces to maybe tie someone up. So that was my guess in this scene. Going back to your husband's reaction about how he just had to turn away, it is a very unflinchingly unflattering view of this character. And, props to her for embracing being quote unquote ugly in this movie.
Yeah, she really leans into it, and they really do her no favors in terms of how she's styled and also the camera work. It is right up close,
Yes.
Extreme close up on her face on this piece of tuna fish next to her mouth. I was like, oh, yeah.
Sam Raimi has a real eye for the gross out stuff. So Bradley doesn't care that his father promised Linda a promotion to VP and instead gives the position to his golfing buddy, Donovan. Surprisingly, Linda works up the courage to confront Bradley. He's mildly impressed by her chutzpah, but has no intention of promoting her. I do have another Chekhov's gun in this scene where she's speaking to Bradley. I'm calling it Chekhov's golfing. He's much more preoccupied with golfing than with speaking with Linda, and I think that this will come back to his advantage in some way. He'll be able to bludgeon something with a golf club type instrument, perhaps a beast on the island.
I identified the golfing as well, and I was like, what can this possibly have to do with what happens on the island? I was going to guess that maybe it turns out that the island is inhabited, unbeknownst to them, sort of in the same vein of Triangle of Sadness.
Yes.
And there's actually a golf resort on the island, and this ends up working out to his advantage.
This movie is very Triangle of Sadness, isn't it?
Yeah, just with a little more vomiting.
Much more vomit. A few more CGI wild boars. Linda slinks out of Bradley's office, but not before he introduces her to his stunning fiancée, Zuri. I had Chekhov's fiancé and or Chekhov's diamond ring. At this point, I wasn't really sure how this might pay off later, but I felt that too much screen time was given to that diamond for it to not come back. So I guess that perhaps Zuri would be on the plane with them and crash on the island as well, and that they would be able to fashion her diamond ring into a lens of some sort to make a fire. So though Bradley wants to ship off Linda to another office ASAP, he knows he needs her help finalizing an impending merger in Bangkok first. En route to Bangkok on the company's private jet, Donovan shows Linda's cringeworthy Survivor audition tape to Bradley, and they all laugh at poor Linda's expense. But Linda gets the last laugh, kind of, when the jet is caught in a storm and crash lands in the ocean, killing Donovan and most everyone else on board.
Yes, I debated, is this Chekhov's Survivor audition video? Because there's this moment where she says, there are 3 ways to make fire, and I know all 3. And I was like, okay, she's going to make fire.
Yes.
But again, is this
Castaway.
foreshadowing, or is this just, is this just foreshadowing, or is it a Chekhov's gun? Chekhov's fire making?
Yes. So in this plane crash scene, I heard criticisms that people thought that the CGI was a little bit cheesy, but I think that's all right. I feel like this movie has, you said it kind of harkened back to old Sam Raimi for you. It harkened back to me to like 90s movies for a lot of reasons, the sort of like surface level gender politics, and then even just the CGI itself. Yes, I would agree that it's a little bit cheesy, but we don't need the most realistic looking plane crash or bore in a Sam Raimi movie. And I did also just appreciate the sort of Jaws-like jump scare at the end of the scene.
Oh, yes. It happened too fast to be called a Chekhov's gun. But at the moment at which, so one of her colleagues, I guess we should say, like, spoiler alert, is sucked out of the side of the plane because there's a hole in it. But he catches his necktie on the like armrest as he's being sucked out. And I was like, that's going to choke him to death, and he's going to be suspended like by the necktie, dead on the side of the plane when she tries to leave. Just because this is really just like, I have written screenplays before, and so I was like, this is obviously going to happen. And also I've seen Sam Raimi movies before,
Yes.
and I was like, this is obviously going to happen. I was not, however, expecting the corpse to look the way that it did.
Yes.
And I know we're saying that that's cheesy CGI, but it was so gross. It was so fantastically gross.
Yeah, very effective. Yeah. So Linda washes ashore on a deserted tropical island where she also finds Bradley washed up on the beach. His leg is badly injured and he's unconscious. So using her survivor skills, Linda constructs a shelter, collects water, catches fish, and makes a fire, just as you said, very Castaway style. So in a way, Linda is living her best life, but Bradley decidedly is not. When he comes to, he's ungrateful and critical. He tries to reassert old workplace power dynamics, reminding her that she works for him. In response, Linda takes her things and leaves Bradley to his own devices. So this is really a crux of the film in a lot of ways, sort of upending their previous hierarchical standings once they're removed from society. Again, very much triangle of sadness in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I would say we move away from there even plausibly being Chekhov's guns, at least if we're going by the
Act
dictionary definition, because this is where we transition from Act 1 to Act 2. Act 1 of this movie is over very, very fast.
Yes.
Which I guess is, that's how you do it when you're Sam Raimi and you're making a movie about people stranded on an island who may or may not wish each other dead. This was also where it just sort of, it became unbelievable to me in a way that I thought was a little bit silly, where I was like, is he really trying this after he's not been humbled enough, right? That he's been stranded on the island. His leg doesn't work. He's lying in a shelter that she made for him herself. But she's feeding him fish, and he's like, "Oh no, I don't want it. I want to eat the fish." And I was like, "Really, dude? You're going there." But I guess he had to in order for the rest of the movie to play out the way that it did. So
that's true. And bringing that up, I do feel like there were many moments in this movie where it hits certain beats, as you were saying, earlier than I would expect, and also more often than I would expect, because essentially he does the same act again later, sort of. He's like, I'm going to go off on my own again, and it just never works. He never really seems to learn his lesson. But yeah, so she does return to help him out, and she reminds him that they're not in the office anymore. She also finds a conch shell or a conch shell. I'd say obviously a nod to Lord of the Flies. Never good when one finds a conch shell on a deserted island.
Yeah, that is a good point. I was surprised that the conch, because it's a conch, right? We had a pronunciation lesson
We
on top
did.
of everything else. Yeah, it's called the conch. I was surprised that it looked the way that it did, but I guess, when they're in the ocean, they are a different color from when they are like removed from the ocean and allowed to like sit and get bleached in the sun. Then they turn a nice shade of pink. But when they're in the ocean, they look disgusting.
That's really interesting. I just sort of chalked that up to sort of, creative decision. I didn't realize it was accurate to real life. That's pretty cool. A little less accurate to real life. We also get some scenes where Linda is acclimating to island life and she goes on a boar hunt. This is perhaps the most Sam Raimi scene of the entire film. This boar hunt is very gross, but in a fun way.
It is extremely fun. The boar, obviously it is CGI, but it looks like it's really there. And I guess maybe that's just partly because the boar may be CGI, but the stuff that she gets sprayed with while she is fighting it, blood and all manner of other bodily fluids, that's definitely real, and it adds to the kind of tactile delights of watching this movie.
Very true. I have to applaud Rachel McAdams' comedic chops in so many ways. Not only does she have great line delivery and great comedic timing, but she doesn't hesitate to fully commit to the physical comedy as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Getting buckets of blood and mucus thrown at her, and she really embraces it. So as the weeks pass, Linda feels more and more at home. She is thriving. So when she sees a small boat approaching the island, she doesn't wave them down for help. Instead, she says to herself, "Not yet." Unlike Linda, Bradley is desperate to escape, and he insists that they should build a raft. When Linda rejects the idea, he storms off on his own and fires her. So once again, he feels like he can make it on his own without Linda, and is again proved very wrong. In fact, he, meaning to spell out help in the sand, spells out Heppel.
Yeah, well, he'd spent a lot of time in the sun. He was very hungry. He had low blood sugar.
A little bit sunburnt, yes. So once again, Linda shows him mercy, but not before taunting him with a smorgasbord of luscious island fruits, which she has prepared with a kitchen knife that she claims she found washed ashore. So you mentioned that Chekhov's gun typically is defined by something laid in Act 1, and then the payoff comes in Act 3. Setting that aside for a moment, I think I do have to point out Chekhov's kitchen knife. And I guess we can discuss later whether we think this counts or not, since, as you said, it does come a bit later in the movie.
Yes, I thought that Chekhov, or well, I mean, is it Chekhov's kitchen knife? Possibly. I did identify it as a curiosity item.
This may fall more in like clue category. Like, that there's some breadcrumb being dropped here that there's definitely something suspicious about the kitchen knife. So there is a moment in this scene also where Bradley gets the impression that perhaps Linda is hinting that he could do some sexual favors for her in order for her to take him back into her good graces. And I read an article in Vulture by Alison Wilmore. She said, by nixing any possibility of sexual coercion, explicit or implicit, Send Help wants us to think that there's one way in which Linda is inherently better than the men who have lorded it over her. The movie is happy to have Linda commit acts of brutality to preserve her place on top. But what is true equality if not allowing your anti-heroine to be in all ways just as monstrously self-interested as the men? So I thought this was an interesting take. Like, maybe the movie did lose its nerve in certain ways as to completely shift the dynamics and the gender politics. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, perhaps?
I mean, obviously, Triangle of Sadness did go there, and was interesting for having gone there, but it made it a socially serious movie.
Yes.
In a way that I just don't really think Sam Raimi wants to. And I don't know. As a creator, I think he's perfectly entitled to say, no, I don't feel like introducing gender politics into this
Yes.
story. It's not about that. And also, for what it's worth, because of the way this role is, or this character is written, and because of the way Rachel McAdams plays it, it's entirely plausible to me that she's just really not that interested in him
Mm-hmm.
in that way anyway.
Yeah, a couple of things to dovetail off of that. I agree that I think it's perfectly fine for Sam Raimi to be like, I'm going to do a fun romp of a movie that's over the top and about these two characters duking it out without having to necessarily have a bigger message. And I think that that is a perfectly acceptable reading of the film. I would say I don't think this movie necessarily has a greater message to it vis-a-vis gender politics. I think that it doesn't try to be a morality play and doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that's fine. And also, to your point about you're not even sure whether this character would go for that or if that'd be something that she's interested in. I did appreciate that this movie, it really kept me guessing, I would say purposefully, because sometimes I was like, oh, she genuinely wants to get with this guy. Or maybe she's just, living her own life and just happens to be stuck on an island with an attractive man. And it's really this back and forth where like you're really not even sure who to quote unquote root for scene to scene, because sometimes Linda's quite awful and sometimes Bradley's quite awful. So I feel like if we had made one person too monstrous, that it would have like tipped the scales too much and being like you're no longer going back and forth between rooting for either character.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also, and perhaps this is a choice on their part as opposed to like something that the universe inflicted on them and on us. They don't have any chemistry at all. And there's this one scene where he's like bathing naked in the ocean and she's sort of looking at him, but you just get the sense of like, it's just a naked man. It's been a while since she's seen one of these.
Yes.
And, and he's not unattractive to look at, but it's not a desirous, like yearning moment for her.
Yes. And when I said that they had chemistry at the top of the episode, I guess I should specify. I agree. I don't think that their chemistry was romantic, but they have this sort of like adversarial electricity that I felt like worked very well playing off of each other.
Yes, for sure.
So, with things tenuously patched up between them, Linda leads Bradley on a hike up a sheer cliff where she tells him how to spot poisonous berries and warns him not to venture to the far side of the island. So, going back to your observation about the golfing and how you thought there might be a resort on the other side of this island. So, it was also in this scene where I was like, oh, well, clearly she is hiding something else that is on the other side of that island.
Yes, I concurred. I concur with that.
Also, again, similar to the knife, it's got to be Chekhov's poisonous berries. But the question really is, does this come too late in the movie for it to technically count?
Mm-hmm.
When they are returning, Linda slips off the edge of the crumbling path and is surely about to fall to her death, but Bradley pulls her to safety. They seem to grow closer, and one evening they get drunk on fruit wine and trauma dump on each other. Linda confides in Bradley about her abusive marriage, and Bradley also opens up about his abusive parents. I thought this was an interesting scene because it does sort of do some work to try to balance out who you're meant to root for. It gives a little bit of sympathy to Bradley by giving him a traumatic past.
Yeah, yeah. It just occurred to me that a thing about this movie is it has this echo of the Survivor series,
Mm.
which is very much about like it's not just do you have the skills to survive in a remote location, but it's also like how charming are you? How good
Mm.
are you at narrativizing, at making alliances, at like telling a story about yourself that is compelling to other people or telling people a story about themselves that they find compelling so they want you around. And just kind of like understanding the entire movie within that framework of like, who do you root for and why? I think when I started thinking about that while I was watching it, that enriched my experience of it, and also meant that I was able to sort of suspend my expectations a little bit of like, am I supposed to be able to straightforwardly find a hero here?
Yes.
Because, on Survivor, like you don't really have that. It's like there's just this cast of people and they each have their strengths and their weaknesses and their flaws and their things that make them likable. And, everybody has their own favorite. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. Like it was possible as the movie went on for you to become more fond of Linda or of Bradley, depending
Yes.
on like just kind of what baggage you may personally have brought to the entire thing.
That's a very good point. I'm going to put a pin in that for the second because there is a point at the very end of the movie where my visceral reaction told me who I was rooting for, where I don't think my brain necessarily would have been able to choose earlier. But yeah, who would get the villain edit if they were to be on Survivor? I'm assuming Bradley, just because that's the way the political winds are blowing, right? You can't have the douchey guy be the hero.
Indeed. And well, not to get ahead of ourselves, but
But yeah. So yes, as you mentioned, the next morning, Linda glimpses Bradley naked, and later they snuggle up together to quote unquote share body heat when a storm forces them to seek shelter in a cave. Speaking of tropes, that share body heat trope sure does come up a lot in fiction, doesn't it?
yes, although it is rooted in reality.
That is true.
Yes, that is in fact like if you're ever cold and you need to prevent hypothermia and there's another person there, you should, take off as many of your clothes as possible, especially if they're wet, and get close to each other and share body heat.
Did you know this before or during your research for how to survive in the woods?
I have known this since I did lifeguard training
Yes.
back when I was a teenager. But what's very funny is that I've had this reinforced for me over the years. I keep stumbling across this information. But in my early 20s, I heard about it from a friend of a friend who had been through Marine boot camp, where they do this thing where they drop them in a location where it's like, it's cold. It's cold at night and there's nothing to do except hug each other. And, and you have to do it to survive. And it basically like forces the guys to get over any hang-ups they might have about being close with another man physically in that way. And the reward, it's like the faster you get over your hang-ups about hugging another guy for body heat, the more you're going to like at the end of the night, you're going to be like in the center of this like warm clump of Marines. And everybody who took too long to like get comfortable with it is going to be like clinging to the outer edge, the outer rim of the clump of Marines. They're not going to be as warm as you are. So
That's a team building exercise for sure. I also did lifeguard training as a teen, but they taught us how to inflate a pair of jeans to use as a flotation device.
Did they throw you in the pool? You had to like take the jeans off in the pool and inflate them? Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
I guess some things are universal. So after the storm, we see that Bradley is hiding something from Linda, but she doesn't notice. They rebuild the camp together and Bradley offers to make dinner for Linda as a gesture of gratitude. Obviously, he's being super sus at this point, and we're meant to believe that Linda is a smart, intelligent person. So it was in this moment where I thought, well, is she actually falling for him? Because the only reason I can see why she would trust him this far is if she were blinded by lust, perhaps. But yeah, I guess maybe it's just the movie trying to keep us on our toes, because it seems pretty obvious to the audience that he is hiding something.
Yes, yeah. Although, I mean, we, have the advantage of like seeing his facial expressions when
That's
he
true.
turns away from her, which she doesn't. And I don't know. I mean, I think that like the enjoyment of the companionship doesn't necessarily have to be sexually tinged, although this was the one point at which it was like at least slightly plausible to me. Yeah.
So as promised, Bradley prepares dinner, but he spikes Linda's food with the poisonous berries and attempts to flee, on the improvised raft he had hidden in the bushes, leaving Linda to die. However, the waves batter the raft to pieces and Linda saves him once more. Again, we get some more gratuitous vomit. I had to turn away from this scene. Usually I'm not that squeamish, but...
Yeah, okay. So this, you said earlier that the wild boar you thought was the most Sam Raimi moment in this movie. No, it was her giving him mouth to mouth and then vomiting all over his face and then giving him mouth to mouth again. And then, and the vomiting and the mouth to mouth interchangeably goes on for like 3 beats longer than is even remotely necessary. And yet it is perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Defeated, Bradley tearfully insists that he wasn't trying to kill her, but Linda decides to put him in his place. She paralyzes him with an octopus neurotoxin and pretends to castrate him with the knife. Much to Bradley's relief, Linda had only gutted a dead rat, but the message is received: his balls belong to her. I was also very relieved that she did not really castrate Bradley, because that would have been a bridge way too far, where I wouldn't have been rooting for Linda at all anymore.
Yes. I was like, what is she going to cut off of him? Because I thought it might be, something he didn't really need, like a toe,
Mm-hmm.
And this was when my husband said, there are really like shades of misery going on here. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. If it had been misery, she would have actually cut his balls off.
Yes.
This is a different dynamic, but you're supposed to think that for a moment. It's true.
Yeah. Again, I think the movie does a good job of keeping me on my toes, kind of second guessing what's going to happen or what has just happened. So, kudos to Sam Raimi and the writers.
Yeah. And a little bit of a deep cut in this scene. I don't know if he did this on purpose, but there is this movie, Hard Candy, starring Patrick Wilson and Ellen Page. It's from a number of years ago, 15, maybe even more, where he is a possible like rapist pedophile, and she is the friend of somebody that I can't remember if he's supposed to have killed or just molested, but she sets up a sting, and she goes and basically poses as a, young teenager for the purposes of entrapping him, then drugs him. Then he wakes up bound, I guess, I can't remember if he's taped to a table or whatever, but she similarly says okay, I'm going to castrate you. And she numbs his genitals with ice. So similar setup. He can't see what she's doing, but he sees her putting a rubber band, saying it's actually a very simple procedure. And then at the end, it turns out that she didn't do it, because you really cannot have your heroine or, your female protagonist castrating a guy and root for her afterwards. It's just a bridge too far.
I hadn't seen that movie. It is interesting, though, how many callbacks there are in this movie, or just similarities, as you said, that movie, or Triangle of Sadness, for sure, in many ways. Misery, Castaway, the list could go on and on. But even though there are so many other movies that this one pulls from, it still doesn't feel derivative. Again, I think that's just because Sam Raimi has this very signature style, when in someone else's hands, if it weren't so unique to the director, then it might have felt more derivative. Mm-hmm. One day, Linda is intercepted by Bradley's fiance, Zuri. Zuri apparently had never stopped looking for Bradley, and she chartered a small boat to continue searching for him. Zuri is overjoyed, but Linda is devastated. She agrees to lead Zuri and the boat captain to Bradley, but really leads them to the precarious cliffside where she once fell over. Zuri slips and falls, and the boat captain manages to grab her arm. They beg Linda to help pull them up, but she hesitates, and we get a mysterious fade out. So yeah, did you have a guess as to what did or didn't happen when we get the fade out?
There was no question in my mind about what was happening there. Although, I have to say, number one, Linda was really taking a flyer on the crumbly hillside cliff crumbling again in
Yes.
exactly the same way, in exactly the same place. But once Zuri is dangling and the guy has hold of her arm and they're both yelling, pull us up, like it's actually not really possible for her to do that. I mean, she didn't have to do what she did, but not helping, perfectly valid choice.
Yeah, this movie, you couldn't accuse this movie of being hyper realistic, but yeah, it would be hard to believe that she could help pull up two people off the side of a cliff. So Linda returns to camp alone. She's bereft, plagued by guilt for what she did or didn't do, question mark. She has a nightmare about Zuri crawling from the ocean, a bloated zombie-like corpse. Again, you know, Sam Raimi has to put his little stamp on it. This was such an unnecessary scene, but he's like, I need a bloated zombie corpse to jump scare.
If there's not a zombie, is it a Sam Raimi movie?
Oh, that's a good question. If a tree falls in the woods, yeah. If there's not a zombie, is it really a Sam Raimi movie? At the beach, Bradley spies a hand with a suspiciously familiar diamond ring poking out of the sand. He puts the pieces together. Linda killed Zuri, and in a rage, he confronts her about what she did. Linda insists that it was an accident, but Bradley doesn't believe her. And then a fight ensues. Okay, maybe I was premature in saying which scene was the most Sam Raimi-y, because this one is this one is very Sam Raimi-y as well. There's scalping, there's stabbing, there's biting, there's eye gouging.
Oh, yes, yeah. The eyeball moment. That was where I was like, I would like this scene to end now.
Yeah, I have a real problem with any sort of eyeball or tooth related violence. That really makes me turn away. I do also want to point out that Linda uses the shoelaces of her trusty little mules to garrote Bradley.
Yes. I just realized we didn't mention, but you know, I had identified Chekhov's inspirational posters earlier. And there is a moment where she's trying to like give him a kind of a pep talk. And she's like, hang in there.
Oh, you're right.
Positive attitude is everything. So,
You know, I hadn't clocked that. Yeah, no, that's great. So in the fracas, Bradley finds himself on the forbidden side of the island. And what do you know? Lo and behold, there is a fully appointed luxury mansion nestled in the jungle. Linda goes full mask off on her villainy and explains everything to Bradley. We flash back to when she first spotted the boat, which she followed to the mansion and snuck in, taking full advantage of all its luxuries, including the trusty kitchen knife. We also get the full scene of what happened to Zuri and the boat captain. Not only did Linda not help them up, but she murdered them both in cold blood by bludgeoning the captain with a rock and sending them plunging to their deaths.
mm-hmm.
So this is interesting to me because it's like, well, we can't have the hero castrate someone and expect us to still be on her side. And yet we can have her murder two people and still be expected to be on her side. It's interesting how that works.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing. Like, two human lives still less important than two testicles. That's complicated math that I don't understand, perhaps because I'm not a man.
Yes. How to tell if a movie is written and directed by a man, I suppose. So back in the mansion, Linda corners Bradley, holding him at gunpoint. Bradley tries to convince Linda that he's seen the light. He admits that, yes, he was horrible, but he's changed because she has saved him. He says that they can make it work together there on the island, just the two of them, and he even professes his love for her. And she says that she loves him back. So obviously he's lying. Do we think that Linda is lying as well, or do we think that she has fallen for him?
I don't know. I mean, I really wonder if, had he been sincere, would she have gone for the like continued let's live together on the island indefinitely? I think she probably would have eventually gotten tired of him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the appeal of the island was, well, more appealing than him. I think that she would have been happy to stay at the island. I mean, maybe if her cockatiel had been there with her, she would have elected to stay forever.
I was gonna say, you know, she kind of did Sweetie dirty. I was thinking, like, doesn't she want to get back to her cockatiel? And who's caring for the cockatiel while she's away.
Yeah.
This scene is where I noticed a continuity error that completely took me out of the movie for a moment, which was very unfortunate. Um, she, there's a moment where she raises an object over her head, which we haven't gotten to yet. So I'll let you say what it is and why. But her armpits are completely clean,
Yes.
like no hair, freshly shorn armpits, and I was like, that is not how that would look after a month plus
No.
on an island with no razors.
I will say, I don't know why, but I was actively looking for that in the movie, the whole movie, and the entire movie. I was like, well, I guess she found a razor somewhere, just like all the women on Lost. So yes, Linda seems to fall for Bradley's charms, but he disarms her. He tries to shoot Linda, but the shotgun jams, giving Linda time to grab a golf club from the wall. She whacks Bradley in the head with it, killing him. Poetic justice, I guess, question mark. Yes, this is the thing that she grabs from the wall, the golf club.
This was Chekhov's golf club, but
Yes.
we did not call it appropriately.
No, not in the way that I anticipated.
And then cut to, like, you don't actually see him die.
No, I guess we just have to presume that he is dead. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this, because it says she was the sole survivor. There is this jump cut to.
Yes, so it's a year later. Linda is not only alive, but she's thriving. She is at a celebrity golf tournament. It turns out she is hailed as a real-life survivor and a best-selling novelist, which she is following up with a self-help book. And then, she gets her happily ever after, I suppose. We see her driving into the sunset with One Way or Another blaring on the radio and her cockatiel Sweetie at her side.
Assuming that is, in fact, Sweetie.
Yes.
Did Sweetie make it during the month that she was away, or did she just get a new cockatiel that looks exactly like Sweetie?
Based on what we know of the character from the beginning of the movie, I don't foresee anyone that would have stepped in to help take care of poor Sweetie and feed Sweetie toast and whatnot.
Yes. Although, if she was going to Bangkok, she probably would have made arrangements for
Oh,
Sweetie.
that's true.
Maybe Sweetie was at like bird camp.
Yes. We'll have to go to doesthedogdie.com and see how they weigh in on the treatment of Sweetie the cockatiel.
Oh, does the dog die? Do they do not dogs?
They do, in fact. Actually, I looked it up for a recent movie covered on the podcast, the new Running Man movie, in which there were CGI rats. And the website flagged that the CGI rats were, in fact, in distress.
It's funny. People are really obsessed with this. And I understand, I'm a dog owner. And at this point in my life, if there's a dog in a movie or a TV show, I pause it and I go to doesthedogdie.com just to check. I will still watch it, but I need to be prepared emotionally. I don't know. This is my weakness. However, I also have a real bone to pick with, like, there's this whole contingent of people on Goodreads, where my books live and can be rated, who will just go and like 1-star your book if it contains any kind of animal cruelty in it. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm sorry, but sometimes bad things have to happen to animals that don't exist in the context of a story, because it's important for your character to have experienced this trauma in their life or whatever. And people need to stop doing that.
I agree. I feel like it's hard, speaking for myself as a cat person, because often in movies or fiction, a cat is killed to establish stakes. This happens a lot, especially in horror. Mm-hmm. The poor family cat is found dead, whereas I'd say more often than not, the dog typically survives.
Ooh, it depends. Like if it's a horror movie from the 70s, that dog is dying.
No one's safe. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So before we get to the game portion of tallying our Chekhov's guns, did you have any parting thoughts about this movie? Any final thoughts?
I thought it was a lot of fun.
I did too.
I went in with, no particular expectations, just thinking I would be entertained, and I was.
I agree. One of my notes here just says romp, and I feel like, yes, it was a fun romp. I know it wasn't a summer movie. I believe it came out in January or February, but It feels like a summer movie. It's kind of escapist in a weird way, going to a tropical island. You know, it checks all the boxes as far as what you want from a Sam Raimi movie, what you want from a horror movie. Always great to see Rachel McAdams on the screen. Oh, you mentioned earlier that sort of your allegiances shift, or like if this were Survivor, it's sort of up to the audience what they bring to the table, who they end up rooting for. It was in that final scene where Bradley was trying to trick her that I felt myself saying, "Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it, Linda." So I guess at the end of the day, I was ultimately on Linda's side, but I think that's only because she was played by Rachel McAdams, who I think has buckets of charisma.
It's true. Yeah. Had she been played by somebody else, I'm not sure how I would have felt. I did find myself thinking, like, if this had been Lena Dunham, would I have felt the same? And I don't think I would have.
Yeah, if they had leaned more heavily like the Misery route, yes, I feel like it would have been a very different movie. Absolutely. I did also expect this to be a little bit more predictable as far as like a revenge movie goes. But I appreciated it was a bit more nuanced than that. It wasn't quite as obvious as I thought the ending might have been. I thought they might have made Bradley like so completely unlikable and Linda so completely likable that you were firmly on her side the whole time. She would get justice. She would get her revenge. He would get his just desserts. And even though I guess that does happen, you know, there's a bit more moral ambiguity going on there.
Yeah. I don't really love that he died. I don't feel that he ultimately really deserved to die.
Yes, I did ask myself, did everyone get what they deserved? And I do think in a lot of ways the punishment outweighed the crime here, because it's like, yeah, he was a douchey boss to her for like a day. Is that really murder worthy?
I mean, unless, you know, do we believe that he did not actually intend to kill her when he poisoned her?
Right. That is a good question. I mean, I don't know why, but I did believe him when he said that. But
yeah, me too. I think if you tried to kill somebody, like, you wouldn't also yell "fuck you, Linda" over your shoulder as you launched your raft. Yeah.
Good point. All right. So I think that's going to do it for our discussion of Send Help. Now it's time to check out the Chekhov's guns and find out who won our little game. Your first guess was the monogrammed bag, which did not come back, unfortunately.
No, she had a monogrammed mug on the island, but
yes.
I don't think that counts.
Oh, that's true. There was the monogram mug. The inspirational posters. Personally, I don't know if I'd call that a Chekhov's gun. I would call that a callback, but again, the lines are very blurry. You had Chekhov's One Way or Another.
Now, I think I get credit for that one.
I think so too. I mean, that definitely had a setup, definitely had a payoff. I mean, it had to, right? You can't introduce a song with lyrics like that and not have it come back. I guess Chekhov's Little Mules, which she did use in the fight against Bradley. I feel like my guesses were very weapon oriented. This happens a lot for me in guessing Chekhov's gun.
What does this mean about you? I'm going to make sure I never get stranded on a desert island with you, or at least never in an adversarial context.
Right. I promise I'll just make wonderful looking sushi, I swear. So we both guessed Chekhov's golfing, which did have a payoff, though not exactly in the way that we anticipated. However, you did guess that there would be a secret resort, a golfing resort. So I would say in a way you also were able to anticipate what would happen later in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, what I am struck by is that there's just really like a dearth of actual Chekhov's guns in this movie, which I don't really think that that's our fault. I think it's Sam Raimi's fault.
I absolutely agree. Anytime something should be a Chekhov's gun and isn't, you know, it's obviously the director's fault.
Yeah. It's specifically Sam Raimi's fault, even in movies that he didn't direct.
I'll do that going forward. I'll be like, Sam Raimi, how dare you?
Did it again.
I guess Chekhov's diamond ring and or fiance.
Oh, yeah.
She did come back, had a payoff in a way. And then you guessed, well, you said at the moment you weren't sure whether you fully believe this was a Chekhov's gun or not. The Survivor audition videos, specifically that she'd be able to make fire.
Right. Is that just foreshadowing? Is it character development or is it a Chekhov's gun? Just keeping in mind that a Chekhov's gun is a gun placed on the table in the first act that needs to be fired by the third.
Yes.
I don't know.
The lines really do blur. I would say if we really want to strictly adhere to the Act 1 setup, Act 3 payoff, this gets its setup and its payoff both in Act 1, essentially, since she makes the fire in the next scene.
That is true. Yeah.
So if we want to go by that definition.
Yeah, I don't think it counts.
Okay. So we'll say no for that one. And I guess going forward then, for the sake of this episode, we're really strictly adhering to the Act 1, Act 3 format. So I'd say everything that follows, the kitchen knife, the poisonous berries, and the far side of the island, I guess technically couldn't be Chekhov's guns since they are introduced following Act 1.
Mm-hmm. You did call the mules, though, the little mules.
Yes, that's true. And I want to give us points for the golfing as well.
Okay.
So points for one way or another, points for little mules, and points for golfing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so.
Points to everyone. Usually I give extra points if someone precisely guesses how a Chekhov's gun will pay off, but I don't think either of us perfectly guessed how these would pay off. So I think we have to call it a tie.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, that's fair. And you know what? In cases of ties where there have been before, I feel it's only proper etiquette to give the win to the guest. So that's what I've done in the past. So we can say tie with Kat as the honorary winner.
Is my prize a sushi dinner served on a beach by somebody who maybe wants to kill me?
I promise it is not laced with poison berries. So, Kat, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you join me on the podcast. One more time, where can listeners find you online?
I am a writer for the Free Press. I am, unfortunately for me and for the universe, still on Twitter, which I will continue to call Twitter. I am the host of the Feminine Chaos podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. And I am the author of How to Survive in the Woods, which you can get wherever books are sold.
Excellent. And I do highly encourage everyone to go read How to Survive in the Woods. I loved it. I highly recommend it. Also, if you're listening to and enjoying this podcast, please do subscribe on YouTube and give us a like. It really helps me out. And until next time, thanks again for listening. Bye. Thanks for listening to Chekhov's Whatever. Go to chekhovswhatever.substack.com to follow along with the podcast. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a positive review. You can also find video clips and full audio episodes on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe at Chekhov's Whatever. And finally, you can send email to chekhovswhateverpodcast@gmail.com. All right, let's end this show with a bang.